and not look for a treatment, but look for freedom and connection in themselves, not just their bodies. Those people got better, and I just found that thrilling. So I would say at the point where I gave up a massage, this was just clearly going to be my life's work.
How did you manage to make a living at it?
Well, we have a 2-income family, and my husband's income's larger, so that helps a whole lot. Really a lot. I don't know how I would have raised a family on just my income, but people do. And we live very simply. We live in a very small house, and we're not big spenders. But the sort of how did I build a practice? How do I keep a practice going? How do I keep financially viable with this work? I work at it all the time. I think about it all the time. I'm not promoting it like a sort of car salesman all the time, but I really am always I was actually thinking of this last night. A woman from about 3 hours from here contacted, I think, several local teachers last summer and asked if we might do a workshop this January. And within about an hour, I was on the phone with her, scheduling it, getting the day set on the calendar, and committing to it. So I would say that's how, is being willing to travel, being willing to work with all different kinds of groups, being willing to haul my table to people's houses if they've just had a knee replacement and they can't get to my studio, things like that. Just staying with it. A lot of teachers give up when one student quits or something. But you just stay with it. You just keep going.
What do you find were the most effective ways to get clients?
I honestly think it's by being a living example of the work yourself and being involved in the work yourself. Certainly teaching workshops is very important. But a lot of it really is just who you are, how you present to people, how you present the work. I represent the work as exciting and creative and interesting and fun and fascinating rather than this is going to cure your back problem. It might. I don't ever promise that it will to people. But I guess because just being excited about the work brings people in. And then being very positive. My first teacher on a regular basis, because I followed her around the country for a year, was Marge Barstow. And she was amazing because she never said anything negative, ever. Just pure constructive thinking. So when I come out of a workshop with an Alexander teacher and I've been told a lot of negative stuff, I don't feel like going back. So I think a lot of it is just really remaining constructive. Most of my students come because other people have sent them who've already been. So it's a big word of mouth thing, So I think you got to have fun and take it seriously. It's a paradox.
Let me ask you about something you just said. If you go to an Alexander workshop and the teacher is negative, it doesn't make you want to go back. Could you give me some examples of negative ways that the technique is talked about and how it could be translated into more positive and appealing ways?
Well, it's not just the technique. I think it's actually the medical model that so infuses our culture, that so conditions us in the way we talk about our physical bodies, tends to be pathology-based. What is wrong? So, for instance, in the book I wrote, I described the situation of being in Argentina with 104 guitarists and 2 Alexander teachers, And if we began to entertain what was wrong with the guitarists, we were going to be dead in the water. So at that point, I just started presenting positive concepts of the work, and when people began to complain, I'd say, we're just not doing that. That's not what this is. So I think it's not just that the teachers are being negative, but anytime we buy into the negativity and trying to fix what's wrong and going down all these rabbit holes trying to chase the pathologies in our thinking and our movement, even in our feelings, we're on the wrong track, because this is learning not to do that. It's not denial, but it's redirecting the energy. So when I'm in a situation where it's pointed out that, I'm doing this bad thing and that bad thing, and that's the predominant focus, I find that pretty killing. I mean, I worked with John Nichols at the AGM last June, and he did this wonderful little bit of work with me. And I sort of asked him, I said, am I holding myself up or am I pulling myself down? And he said, both. And I said, fair enough, I can sense that. But it was all done in this light way with a measure of goodwill, so I didn't feel criticized. And I think that's a measure of his expertise. So as we gain more expertise, I think we can be very positive and still informative. But if we're getting down on ourselves, we're probably getting down on other people too.
Do you use the traditional Alexander language of inhibition and stop and say no?
Definitely. Definitely I do. And I also use the traditional directions, but then there's a whole lot of new language that's arrived in my work with groups that I also use, which is describing some of the basic relationships in the body that support the Alexander litany, the Alexander directions. So there is some original language that floats around too.
Do you think the technique can ever be as popular as something like yoga?
I feel like in this country it could be more popular than yoga because it's Western, and so are we. I think, a little bit, I think it's limited because it's his name. It makes it sort of particular to one person, so it's not like yoga that's a universal word. So I don't think there's any way to fix that except to just get it out there so people know what it is. I feel like to me, it's the most sophisticated form of mindfulness, and mindfulness is everywhere right now, so I don't see why we can't be. We're good at it, and we've been around for a century.
So do you find it more of an advantage or a disadvantage or neutral that many of the things that we talk about in Alexander technique, the language we use, is adopted by so many other things?
I think we can turn it to an advantage. And I do think that there really aren't many other things like what we do where the teachers are as well trained and where people's hands are as good. People get there after 20 years, but a qualified Alexander teacher has great hands. So I don't think that we sell ourselves short by using other people's language too, yet we're always going to be unique because of the quality of what we offer.
Do you find that men and women relate to the work differently? Do you find yourself teaching differently to men as to women?
Well, it's interesting because guitar craft is mostly men because they play the guitar. So in any given course that I would teach on, the guitar circle might hold 60 men and 7 women. So I think my teaching has become very forthright and humorous and kind of strong because I teach men so much. I actually had the husband of a colleague